What's up guys, my name is Ace, and one thing you've probably noticed while creating class setups in Modern Warfare 2 is just how many different recoil types we seem to have based on the descriptions of these attachments. We've got Recoil Stabilization, Recoil Steadiness, Recoil Smoothness, Horizontal Recoil Control, Vertical Recoil Control, as well as just General Recoil Control. And in today's video, I wanted to break them all down to figure out exactly what each of these do in order to help you make the best decisions possible while creating your class setups. So with this, I decided to test on two different guns, an SMG as well as an assault rifle. So we have the MP5 or Lockman sub, I'm just going to call it the MP5, as well as the M4. And all of these tests are done at 14 meters. As you can see here, I'm not going to show me shooting in every single case. I'm just going to be showing the side-by-side comparison with each of these attachment types. And let's just dive right into the first recoil type, which is Recoil Stabilization. And first up, looking at the MP5, what we can see here is it seems like the total magnitude of recoil is roughly the same, although maybe a little bit more compressed than the base recoil. However, the main thing to point out with Recoil Stabilization is it seems to be helping with that side-to-side bounce or deviation from the recoil path. And this was supported by my M4 testing as well. While there is still some side-to-side bounce in some of these recoil plots, we're looking at averages here. And on average, there is less of that deviation away from the path, less of that side-to-side bounce as it kicks upward. And therefore, that's what Recoil Stabilization is all about. Basically, just think like the Commando foregrip in Modern Warfare 2019. That's essentially what Recoil Stabilization seems to be. As for Recoil Steadiness, this one I actually had quite a hard time figuring out. Based on my testing with both the MP5 as well as the M4, it seems like Recoil Steadiness just helps in general with all recoil types. I thought maybe this was impacting center speed, but I did some testing on that and that's not the case. However, I did notice that this not only helps with that deviation from the path or the side-to-side bounce with recoil, it's also helping with the total vertical as well as horizontal magnitude of recoil. So Recoil Steadiness seems to affect more than just one recoil stat for a gun, and as a result, it overall seems to be a better choice than Recoil Stabilization. As for the next one, this one I found quite interesting, and you see this on many of the suppressors in the game. This is Recoil Smoothness. And with this one, when we look at the MP5 comparison here, I'm not really seeing much of a benefit in any way here. It's pretty much the same as the base recoil plot, not really much difference there. And then when we get into the M4, honestly, it's pretty much the same story. I don't really see much of a benefit to using Recoil Smoothness on the M4. And because I wasn't seeing much of a result, I actually tested on a few other guns as well, but it was the same story. Recoil Smoothness doesn't seem to actually have an impact on your actual recoil in-game, like where the shots are hitting. So I thought maybe this just helps reduce visual recoil, for instance. So I tested that, and once again, no apparent change here. And as a result, the conclusion I have on Recoil Smoothness is it doesn't really seem to be helping much, if at all. And I don't think I'd even factor Recoil Smoothness in while making my attachment choices. If I can't even find any change in a controlled testing environment, then I'm not going to notice it in-game. So I just don't consider Recoil Smoothness to be anything that actually helps with recoil. As for the next recoil type, this one's pretty self-explanatory. This is Vertical Recoil Control, which does exactly what you'd think. It compresses the total vertical magnitude of your recoil, but in doing so, just know your recoil pattern may look like it has more horizontal recoil. That's just because everything is being compressed downward. So if a gun has high horizontal recoil, I wouldn't worry too much about Vertical Recoil Control, but it can really help with those guns that don't deviate too much horizontally. And speaking of horizontal, I couldn't find any attachments on the MP5 that only impacted horizontal recoil, so I couldn't isolate that factor for that. But I do have a comparison with the M4, and as you can see here, again, horizontal recoil, very self-explanatory. It just straightens things up a little bit with your recoil pattern and ensures that your gun doesn't go too hard to the left or to the right. And finally, for our different recoil types, we just have General Recoil Control. And with this, with the MP5, it looks like it's helping with not only the vertical magnitude of the recoil, but also that side-to-side bounce in the horizontal recoil. And it's a very similar story with the M4. We just see an improvement across the board when it comes to recoil control. Honestly, this looks very similar to the Recoil Steadiness tests that I did. So in my eyes, at least, I treat recoil control and recoil steadiness as effectively the same stat. They may technically be altering stats in different ways, but they seem to both have the same general outcome, which is just reducing recoil across the board. Now, those are all the recoil types that are stated on attachments in the game. However, there is one other stat that I wanted to put to the test here to see if this did have an impact on recoil, and this is aiming stability, also known as idle sway. Basically, how much your sight will be moving when aiming down sight on its own. It's basically to simulate the breathing of the character. And the reason I wanted to test this is this varies from Call of Duty game to Call of Duty game. In older COD games, your idle sway would effectively turn off the moment you started firing your gun, so it wouldn't be factored into your recoil at all. It only affected your first shot accuracy. However, in Modern Warfare 2019, as well as Call of Duty Vanguard, which this game's engine is based off of, idle sway does continue to happen as you're firing your gun, and therefore it will have an impact on your recoil. And so when I put this to the test, I found that idle sway does impact your recoil in the game. And as a result, when building your class setups, you definitely want to be aware of aiming idle stability or just general aiming stability, because both of these will technically have an impact on your recoil as well. You're going to get a tighter recoil spread with better idle stability. And with that, that's going to wrap it up for the testing that I did with this. Now let's do a quick recap as well as what you should be focusing on for different types of guns. When it comes to recoil stabilization, this helps with the side-to-side bounce with your recoil. So guns that have a lot of that side-to-side bounce, you really want to focus on attachments that improve your recoil stabilization. Next, when it comes to recoil steadiness, this is just an across-the-board improvement to recoil as far as I can tell. So this just seems to be a good option anytime you want to improve recoil. When it comes to recoil smoothness, this seems to have a pretty negligible impact on recoil, so I wouldn't even really consider recoil smoothness too much if you're trying to improve the recoil of your gun. Then after that, horizontal and vertical recoil, those are both self-explanatory. Recoil control just seems to be helping with recoil in general, so that's always a great option if you're trying to improve recoil. And then finally, idle sway or aiming stability. This is something that is actually going to help you with your recoil in the game. And that's something that's underrated, and you also have to be very careful that you aren't harming your aiming stability, since many of the attachments do that. And with that, that's going to wrap it up for today's video, explaining the different recoil types in Modern Warfare 2, and this is where I want to hear from you guys in those comments down below. First off, were you guys surprised by any of the results in this video? And second, what do you think about the fact that they've separated all these different recoil characteristics instead of just keeping it simple with just vertical and horizontal recoil control? If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.